Step number 10, Rabbi Twerski, is dealing with painful memories of our childhood and adolescence which have hurt our self-esteem. Learning disabilities, abuse, over-disciplining by parents. How does one get over those disabilities and pain and still maintain or develop their self-esteem?
I think that the fact that we have undergone painful experiences early in life. Some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth and they have wonderful caring parents. And some people have parents who've been neglectful, have been too interested in themselves or for whatever. And those are very painful memories. But as I pointed out this morning, there's no way to reverse history. And we have to take what we were given and make the best of it and do what we can with our lives, rather than saying, poor me, I'm a victim of what my parents did and therefore I'm going to go out and eat worms. Right? Not allow, there's nothing we can do about those painful memories. There's no particular reason for ruminating on them or trying to harbor them. It happened, and it's bygone, it's farfal. There's one of the things that we should learn to do is to realize what things we have to work on and what kind of things are farfal. Right? That's one of the wonderful things about the prayers that the alcoholic uses, the serenity prayer, where we say, God grant me the serenity to accept that which I cannot change, the courage to change that which I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right? That there's things in life which have happened that are irreversible, and they're there. We have to accept that they're there and try to make the best of us. Right? There are some people who have had enormous stresses in early life and have overcome them and become great people. And the biographies of great people are full of examples of people who've undergone a great deal of adversity in their early lives. But they accepted it, and instead of feeling sorry for themselves, went about growing and doing what they could to become better people, to become great people. So again, things that have happened that are irreversible. My mother used to give every Friday night what she referred to as the Baal Shem's Simus, which is Farfel Simus. Right? And in Yiddish, the word for farfallen, right, means it's over and done with. Right? And so my mother used to serve the Farfel Simus Friday night, and she would say, "Wusse gewesen behind is farfallen." Whatever happened until now is over and it's done with, and you don't go back and pick it up. Right? And we have to learn how to leave those things behind us so that they don't become obstacles in our progress, and the wisdom to have the courage to continue doing that which we can do.
Step number 11 is dealing with current suffering in our lives. How do we survive the current suffering, stenosis in one's back, difficulties in chronic pain, chronic challenges, and how does that not rob us of our self-esteem and our dignity?
Baruch Hashem, that right now I'm not feeling too bad, but when the pain is bad, it's difficult. Right? Again, it's so easy to feel sorry for oneself, which I try to avoid, and I try to push myself when I have a difficult day. There's some things which can be dealt with medication, but not always. You want to be careful with pain medication that you don't become addicted to it. So you have to learn how to bear some amount of suffering. But I don't see what in the world that should have to do with a person's self-esteem. Right? So whether it's a bad headache, or it's a toothache, or whether it's a backache, right? These are unfortunate feelings, but you have to learn how to be mikabel, Yitzurim V'Ahava. Right? It's a difficult thing because we all want relief, and I can attest to that. And we do whatever is reasonable to get relief. But beyond that, we have to accept that if Hashem has given me this, I'm supposed to accept it and make the best of it and not rebel against Him. We tend to ask Hashem, but why? And that's an unanswerable question. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to know why, so Hashem told him, I'm not going to tell you. There was one tzaddik who lived to be 100 years old. And he said, the reason for my long life, he says, because other people question Hashem. But why this, but why this? Hashem says, you want to know the answer? Come up here and I'll tell you. Right? He says, I've never questioned Hashem. Why? So they don't call me up. Right? So we don't ask why.
Step number 12, and then we'll break after step number 12, is self-esteem in children.
Ooh. I wish I could tell you all that we should know for self-esteem in children. First of all, let me mention there's a book by that title written by a psychologist, Patricia Berney, B-E-R-N-E, and it's entitled Building Self-Esteem in Children. It's a good book to read. I think that one of the things that I found about self-esteem, I think it's contagious. Right? And parents who are self-confident and secure, right, and the home becomes a place which feels of confidence and security, the children will pick up that. And if the parents are insecure and anxious, the children will pick up that. So self-esteem in children begins with having self-esteem in oneself, which is, as we see, is a full-time job. But if we can work on building self-esteem in ourselves, then we can contribute to self-esteem in children. There are some ABCs about parenting, and I can't go into length about it because, first of all, I'm not a child psychologist. But the kind of few things that I've picked up is that there's some things that we should know about children, and that is that all children are different, right? And you don't compare. Right? It's very interesting that if you look at the end of Bereshis, Yaakov Avinu, before he died, called his 12 children together and gave them brachos. And if you look over the brachos that he gave them, none of them are brachos. He isn't wishing anybody good fortune. What he's doing is describing each one's personality. Right? And Rashi makes it very clear, right, that what he's doing is describing each one's personality. So Reuben, you should know yourself, you should know your strengths, and you should know your weaknesses, and knowing yourself, that's your bracha. And Shimon, you should know yourself, and you should know your strengths and your weaknesses, and that's your bracha. Right? So we don't compare children and expect one child to be better or different than because one child is better than another. Children are born with different talents, right? And parents may value different talents. And if a parent has a value that he wants his child to be athletic, right, and this particular child can't catch a ball, right, then he's got to realize his other child is very athletic, sports-minded, then not to compare the two, right? And to allow each child to be evaluated on the child's own terms. I think we have to allow children a little more leeway in making decisions about their lives. What does that mean? It means that perhaps the child who's 3 years old, that the mother can ask him, what would you like to wear today? Right? Now, that doesn't mean that she's going to give in to what he wants to wear, but maybe it's not the proper thing. Right? But allow a child to make some appropriate decisions. Allow a child to express himself or herself. I think that the common phrase of children should be seen and not heard is very misguided. Children should be heard. And we should value seriously what children say. And more than all else, recognize that a child has his right to his feelings. And if a child is angry, we ought to understand why that the child has a reason for being angry. The child may be angry because somebody took his toy, and we think, well, that's a silly thing, you know, it's a 35-cent toy, what's the big deal? Right? But if somebody walked off with our Cadillac, right, we feel justified in being angry that our car was stolen. Right? Now, to the child, that toy is as important as the Cadillac is to his father. Right? And we ought to give the child the right to his feelings. Got to be careful about telling a child, and I mentioned this before, not saying you shouldn't feel that way, that's a terrible feeling. Yeah. The child has no choice about the way he feels. Right? And if the child says, I hate you, Mommy, right? That's a terrible thing. You never say, I hate you, Mommy. Right? Find out what's the child angry about. And help the child understand that he doesn't even know what the word hate means. And that's his way of saying, I'm angry at you, Mommy. And what he may be angry about is because she refuses to let him have an ice cream half an hour before dinner. Right? And you can explain to the child, whatever. You can explain to the child that this is something that's not good for you. But you don't mean that you hate Mommy. You mean that you're angry at Mommy because she didn't let you have what you wanted. But to watch what words the child is using. And if the child says, I wish you were dead, the child doesn't even know what dead means. Right? Maybe the child may think, I wish you'd go away for a while. Right? So I think we've got to be extremely sensitive to what children's feelings are. I have a favorite story that I tell about giving a child a feeling of importance. And the story goes that father and mother had a little 6-year-old boy, and they took him out for dinner. And the waitress came along and took their orders, the father's daughter, the mother's daughter. And she says to the little boy, and she says, and young man, what will you have? And he says, I want 2 hot dogs with a lot of mustard and a Coke. And the mother smiled at the waitress, and she says, you can bring him some roast beef with mashed potatoes and peas. Well, a few minutes later, the waitress comes and she gives the father his order, the mother her order. And in front of the child, she puts 2 hot dogs with a lot of mustard and a Coke. And the mother sits there horrified. And the child smiles, grins from ear to ear, and he says, look, Mommy, she thinks I'm real. See, if children don't have a way to express themselves and have their feelings validated, they get the feeling that they're not real. Right. And that's a terrible feeling for a child to have. Shalom bias is probably the single greatest ingredient for a child to have good self-esteem. Okay. And when parents are disagreeing, the child begins to feel insecure. Right? And if the parents are having a loud disagreement, right? But why are Daddy and Mommy fighting? And you have to explain to them, we're not fighting, we had disagreement, we just talked a little bit too loud. Right? But to provide a true shalom bias is the greatest gift that parents can give their children. Right? And I've often said, children never ask to be brought into this world. We bring children into a very crazy, chaotic, stressful world. Right? And it's our responsibility to give the child the best opportunity for him or her to develop their happiness in life. Right? Which means that that's our first responsibility, and we have to make sacrifices in order to do that. Right? And we have to make sacrifices in terms of what is best for the child. And I know that sometimes, because parnas is so important, that we may spend so much time on earning a living and be able to give the children what we think that they need, but we don't spend any time with them because we're too busy supporting them. And I understand that very well, but we have to understand that what we can give the children of ourselves may be more important than what we can give them in terms of things. Right? And to be able, it's very fine to buy all kinds of the latest toys for the child. And the child may indeed enjoy that, but that doesn't equal some time spent with trying to understand what the child wants, what the child is doing in school, what the child is doing with his friends, and seeing that the child should know that Daddy and Mommy are not too busy to listen to me. Right? And that is a prime thing in self-esteem in children. I told you about the chess thing. When my father disapproved of what I did, he would say to me, "Oh, das passt nicht für dir." You know, in Yiddish that means what you're doing doesn't become you. Right? Or you're too good for that. Why are you doing something that's beneath your dignity? Right? He never told me that I was bad. Right? He told me that what I did was beneath my dignity. It was too good for me. And yet, in spite of that, I ended up with a whopper of low self-esteem, and it wasn't my father's fault. It was what I pointed out earlier. The Yetzer Hara is doing its job, right? And the Yetzer Hara is relentless. There was a study done by a number of researchers on hundreds of families, and they put in all kinds of facts about these families as to what their socioeconomic level was and what their living situation was like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they interviewed families where there were problem children, and we interviewed families where there were no problem children. And then they tried to look from the computer printout as was there anything identifiable in the healthier families. And the only factor that came out was that in the healthier families, the families had meals together more often. Right? Today, that's not a common thing. Right? Kids go into the kitchen and get whatever they can, right? Because mom's at work and dad's at work, and sometimes there's nobody else in the house. So families don't spend time eating together. Unless that we have Shabbos, right? So that we have at least 2 meals together. Right? But to the degree that we can have meals together and make meals a mealtime a pleasant occasion, right? That turns out to be a very important factor in self-esteem. We are not born lawyers, accountants, dentists, surgeons. Why should we think that we are born natural parents? Right? You have to get training to become a doctor. You have to get training to become a lawyer. You have to get training to become an engineer. Why do we think that good parenting is going to come naturally? So, first of all, what many of us do, we'll raise our children the way we were raised. Right? That's the model. Sometimes we're not too happy about that. Secondly, today the world changes not from decade to decade, but from day to day. The rate at which change is occurring is unbelievable. We cannot say that the same principles that were used in our upbringing are going to be adequate for our children. It's a different world. And we have to realize that the world changes. Right? Very interesting that the Torah tells us that Noach was a great tzaddik. And then it tells us that he came out of the teva after the Mabul, and he got drunk. Right? Why would a person who's the Torah says is a great tzaddik, why would he get drunk? So Imre Amos says something very, I think, very precious. He says Noach knew how much he could drink safely without it being affected by it. Right? And so when he came out of the teva, he went back to his previous habit of drinking the amount that was safe. What he didn't realize, this was not the same world. There had been a mabul in between. And it's a different world, and there's new rules. Right? And when the world changes, you can't go by the old world. And we have to look at the fact that maybe we were raised in one way, but maybe we didn't have the horrible experience of immorality of the internet that now faces our children. And our children have to deal with the immorality on the billboards and on the magazine covers at the checkout, at the supermarket checkout. It's a different world. In 1936, I was at the beach. I was 6 years old, and I had to wear a two-piece suit, bathing suit, as a 6-year-old little boy. Now you can see that it's a different world. Right? And we have to think, what do we have to do for the children in this world? And we can't always go by how we were raised. Furthermore, since there are two parents, the father may have been raised in one way, the mother may have been raised in another way. Right? And if he's going to try and raise according to their way, the child is going to be in conflict. So the first thing that parents have to do before the child is born is to get some training in parenting and be on the same page as to how they're going to relate to their children, so that the child is not raised in a attitude of conflict and then tries to play one parent against the other. So self-esteem in children is extremely important. You can't give them self-esteem. What all you can do is try and provide an environment as much as possible for the child to develop self-esteem. Today we're more familiar with learning disabilities that we did not understand before. And we have to be alert to be able to pick up, and this is a job both for the teachers and for the parents. Have a situation of a young man who became a severe drug addict, and he told me that he was very bright, and his father used to listen regularly to what he learned in Chumash, and then one day the father accidentally turned two pages over in the Chumash, right? And the child went down saying what was on the previous page, right? Because he was dyslexic and could not read. And so he had memorized the Chumash. Right? But it wasn't until the child was 10 or 11 years old that the father was aware that the child had a reading disorder. So I have to be very sensitive. There's a certain amount that we can expect from our educational institutions, but they too are under an enormous stress with large classes, and they may not be able to give the child everything that the child needs. And so we have to be careful as parents to get to know our children, and to see what kind of progress they're making, and to listen to the children. A child may come home with a terrible complaint about a teacher, and the parent may react with, I'm going to go tell the principal what kind of teachers he got. Find out what went on first. I can't always take the child's version as to what happened. But one has to be fair, and one has to be an advocate for the child, and one has to realize that the educational institutions are not perfect either.